Type in the code Chicago for a 20% discount. That's salemnow.com.
AM 560, The Answer.
Welcome back to the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. You're listening to Get Down to Business. I'm your host, Shalom Klein, and I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by the man that's been called the Indiana Jones of international business, Kyle Hegarty, who's the managing director of TSL Marketing's Leadership Nomad Group, where he has deciphered the culture code of doing business in Asia and the fastest growing markets, the author of a brand new book, The Accidental Business Nomad, a survival guide for working across a shrinking planet. Kyle, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's great to have you. So upwards of 70%, and I was just flabbergasted by this statistic, upwards of over 70% of foreign ventures fail due to cultural differences. So I am curious to understand what your advice that you've been able to share in your book.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about that 70% statistic, in fact, in some segments, that number's higher. That failure rate is higher. And it's one of those things that I think has been tucked away under the carpet and hidden away in corporate conversations. When companies decide to expand into new markets, they invest a couple $1 million, maybe multiples of that. Things don't go well. They stagger along, and then they kind of pull back quietly and don't tell anybody. One of the main common threads to this failure that people don't really talk about is the fact that there are these cultural differences across regions. So probably the common mistake is that companies will do this cut and paste approach. They will take their business model, they will take their mindset, they'll take their people, and they will say, okay, you're now in charge of international, you're in charge of Asia, you're in charge of Latin America. And again, that's where the problems start, because these markets, not only culturally, but even just institutionally and structurally, have some pretty big differences. And if you go in with those types of blinders, that's where you're probably heading towards that 70% casualty rate.
Oh, it's fascinating, and the book is a must-read, and we'll talk about how people can find it. But due to COVID-19, globalization, I know you argue, has accelerated rapidly, and there are skills, like you said, about harnessing the power of cross-cultural data, learning new skills that are needed now more than ever. So I'm curious, Kyle, as you wrote this book, I'm going to assume that you did not anticipate all of the changes that COVID-19 would create.
Yeah, this book was written a few years ago, or at least, finalized last year before all of this, and I did not have my crystal ball out to predict this. But let me start out by saying that statement that globalization has actually accelerated probably sounds counterintuitive and goes against the grain with a lot of the messaging that's out there today. What I'm arguing is that if you think about what globalization is, if we define it, it's the trading of goods, services, and ideas. A lot of the goods, a lot of the services are not being traded as much, but the ideas that are flying around. This conversation, I'm on the other side of the planet right now here in Singapore. We're all on Zoom calls every single day, not always willingly, but that's the reality. There are more conversations happening. There's more data flowing than ever before. I know we've seen internet traffic spikes starting really in February to ways or to places that have never been predicted. Like the internet is busier now than ever before, and it's communication that's happening. And so the skill sets that we talk about, when I talk about the future global skills, it's how we articulate ourselves, and it's how we navigate these differences. Because going back to that first statement, that 70% statistic, where do these failures happen? Well, it's a failure to communicate, or it's a miscommunication or misunderstanding. So that's what I've been focused on. And in many ways, the COVID situation has simply just accelerated all of this. Certainly not the way I wanted this to happen, but it's it means that we're moving in this direction faster than planned.
Kyle, I know you say you didn't have a crystal ball, but I think in many ways you might have accidentally, and you just didn't know it. And, Kyle, it's interesting. I was reading a piece in the Chicago Tribune the other week, and it was talking about how interesting the employment market, for those that are out of work, there's more competition that's out there because of globalization. A lot of that obviously is, call it national, when you're talking about, from city to city, somebody in New York can be taking a job from somebody in Chicago. Yep. But you're absolutely right, as you argue in the book, globalization, the same principle that holds true for business holds true for employment. These are things that we need to take into consideration. We're going to squeeze in a break in just a moment, and when we come back, we're going to talk, if we can, about some of the tales, both your own tales as well as those that you've experienced and seen from your reporting of again, it's really the story of the accidental business nomad. I absolutely love that title. But Kyle, I just have to ask, as a fellow traveler, you've done business all over the place. Where's your favorite place in the world?
Ooh, favorite is a loaded word. I would say probably the one that really threw me off, that I enjoyed the most for unintentional reasons, would be Pakistan. And I'll just leave that dangling for you. I won't get into details now, but that was a pretty crazy experience.
Well, that just makes people want to purchase your book and learn more about all of your experiences even more. Again, I'm chatting with Kyle Hegarty, the man who's been called the Indiana Jones of international business, clearly has had some interesting travel experiences himself. His book, The Accidental Business Nomad, A Survival Guide for Working Across a Shrinking Planet, was published pre-COVID, but its message is true now more than ever. Kyle, we're going to squeeze in a very quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about some of those tales of triumphs and failures, including tales where unexpected lessons abound. We'll be back and get down to business in just a moment. Don't touch that dial.
Getting from point A to point B doesn't have to be a challenge. Anytime, any day, as long as it's land, the highly trained professional history made it unimaginable that he would defend Christian values as president, or so we thought. In his new book, For God and Country, The Christian Case for Trump, Dr. Ralph Reed shows that President Trump has kept his promises and been the most effective presidential defender of religious liberty and the pro-life cause since Reagan. It's required reading in 2020. For God and Country, the new book by Ralph Reed, available wherever books are sold.
AM 560, The Answer.
Hey, welcome back. As promised, I am continuing my conversation with Kyle Hegarty, who wrote the book, The Accidental Business Nomad. And Kyle, I want to get started in sort of continuing our conversation in emphasizing that our listeners are small business owners. And I'm curious if you can share an example of perhaps a smaller business that has seen perhaps success by using the concept of globalization.
So, I'm Exhibit A of this. We were a small business out of Boston. We grew from about 5 people to 30, and that's when I started just telling clients, by the way, we're doing our stuff in Asia as well. And accidentally, or not accidentally, but unintentionally, I suppose, clients came back and said, hey, we need to figure this out too. And it actually turned into this entire business stream for us. So one statement, one sort of test message that I threw out there ended up changing my career for the rest, for the last 15 years. For small businesses, I'm especially in 2020, this is, these are crazy times. It's not necessarily the right thing to do, which is to look abroad, but it might be worth thinking about different markets. Obviously, your audience is going to have very different audience base. Are there partnerships? Are there patches of new markets out there that might have that growth that companies are desperately looking for, especially in a downturn? What I found in other small businesses is that, well, I'll give you this book. This book has had a lot of success in India, and I had never put a plan in place to do a lot of promotion in India, but I turn around and we'll set something up and just kind of put feelers out to some of those cities out there. And I've got these virtual calls with 100 people that we didn't even advertise for. So again, like this kind of word accidental is deliberate, because I think oftentimes when we put ourselves out there and we get that message out, you never know who's going to bite, and it actually turns into potential new sources of markets and new sources of opportunity.
Absolutely. And Kyle, in a moment, we're going to share where people can find the book, which I truly think is just a fascinating read, and it's timeless, whether you're reading it in 2019 or 2020. But real quick, are there any resources that you would want to share for somebody considering this concept of globalization beyond your book?
Ooh, beyond my book. Okay. So a couple of sources that I referenced throughout the book. One actually was a professor who wrote a thing called, Aaron Meyer's book, The Culture Map, is a pretty good starting point to get a visual sense as to how working styles vary. Because if you're a small business and you find that you've got maybe a partner overseas, maybe you are subcontracting, maybe you've got vendors that you're suppliers from other parts of the world, you've noticed that there are different things. There's something different, and it's hard to put your finger on because a lot of it's invisible. What I'm trying to do, and I think what Professor Meyer did a good job at as well, is to try and put some clarity to that. What are those invisible working styles?
I love it, Kyle. And as we wrap up, get down to business, and I'm sorry to cut you off, I want to make sure that our listeners know where they can find your book. Can you share a website where people can check you out?
Sure. My website's leadershipnomad.com. The book information's there. It's available on Amazon and all the other big places around, so plenty of places to find it.
It sure is. Leadershipnomad.com. Kyle, what a fascinating conversation. Come back and share more with us. You're listening to the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Get on my website, shalomklein.com. That's where you can download podcasts and get a sneak peek of who will be on next week. We are all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Check out my website, shalomklein.com, to success. Let's get down to business. We'll talk to you next Sunday, 6 p.m. right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Did you miss the open enrollment this year?